guys, Toast20 here and welcome to Mile Bay. We're going to be doing things a little bit differently in this series. We're going to be playing with milestones enabled, money enabled, achievements, all that stuff that I've been avoiding over the last 5 or so years that I've been playing City Skylines. I'm actually finally getting to playing the game using air quotes, and I'm really excited to do it. I'm going to give you guys an overview of this series within this short time lapse. If you want to skip the time lapse, go straight to the build, there's a timestamp down below. So the most exciting thing for me about this series is that we're going to be building the city in a very different way. Rather than going, okay, this is going to be a big city, we're going to start with some highways and some roads, and this is what the downtown's going to look like. We're not doing any of that. Instead, we're going to start at the small village surrounded by agriculture that slowly becomes a small town, then a larger town, adding some highways, rail infrastructure, services, slowly becomes a larger city. And it's not just going to be the one. Of course, if it's one of my series, we're going to have multiple places around the map. Not just cities, but small towns, fishing villages, industrial hubs, farmlands, national parks, all that great stuff that's going to form this area. And I think it's just going to be super fun to try and complete the milestones in that manner rather than just building a giant city. And the idea is that you should be able to see a snapshot of the town develop after each episode. So it shouldn't ever look like a work in progress, or eventually it's going to look like this, it's going to look like that. The town, even after the first episode, should look fairly complete, and it's going to continue to look complete, but just grow and change over the series. And I think that's probably the most exciting part for me, is just watching the place change and grow over time. We're going to be going pretty bare bones in terms of mods and assets. I don't want to completely rule them out, but I do want to keep them pretty simple so that you should be able to follow along, download the map, download all the mods and assets I use, which are in the description below. I've sorted them into different collections. I've got visual mods, assets, and then I've got gameplay mods. In total, I'm using about 50. A lot of them are visual mods, a lot of them just make the game run better, like loading screen mod and FPS booster, and there's like a bunch of them that are really just install them and don't even think about uninstalling them. So if you're interested in doing something similar to what I'm doing, getting a similar game experience, then you can pick and choose the mods that you want to use. You don't even have to use many of these. It's really just to show that you don't really need to go onto Steam Workshop, download hundreds and hundreds of mods and assets to get a game looking like this. You can really achieve this kind of look, this kind of game experience with some pretty bare bones, easy to use mods and assets, which I'll be doing a bit more of a walkthrough of how I'm using them and the game mechanics within this series. But then with that being said, I think if there are assets or mods that are available that will definitely enhance the builds that we end up doing. So for instance, when we get to the downtown and start building some skyscrapers, then probably we'll grab some from the Steam Workshop. But whatever I grab, whatever I end up using, I wanted to enhance the game, enhance what we're doing here. The focus of the series is to use zoning, to expand out quickly, to show change, and to play the game in a sense that I think a lot of people can follow along with. Best way to think of this, think of it as vanilla Oceania. Oceania, lots of mods, lots of assets. We're doing pretty much the same thing, but very detailed. Over here, we're going to try and keep things a little less detailed, a little more gameplay experiences, and seeing the whole place just develop up in a much faster sense. So that's the series in a nutshell. Before I get into the live play, the hero mod that's making all this possible is extended game options. That mod allows me to customize the milestones and game experience, but then also makes it possible for me to still work through the achievements. And then this map that I'm using is called Anahita Bay by Owl. It's awesome. It's been on the Steam Workshop for, well, since 2017, so it's an old map, but it's solid as, and I highly recommend it. I've left it in the description below if you want to download it, play around with it, even download the mods and assets that I'm using, and have a go at building something similar if you're interested. I'm going to be doing a separate video to this that explains everything that I'm using and why I'm using it in more detail. This episode is more just how to get started. Speaking of which, let's do that. Let's get started. Let's jump into the live play. And here it is, the new map, the new series. There have been a fair amount of changes that I've done in the time lapse. It was a very quick time lapse, but I've actually done a fair amount of work at changing the map, making it a bit of my own, because there are some things that I definitely want to include on the map within the series. First change that I have made is I've added in my own tree set. When I say my own, I mean some grey flame trees. I didn't make these. These are some incredibly detailed and very amazing looking trees. And I've put it in a couple of different packs. So down here we have these shore pines, which are going to be the main bulk of the trees that you're going to see around the city, actually around the map, I should say. And then out towards the foothills of these mountains, we've got a slightly different type of tree. We've got these Douglas firs, again, by Grey Flame. I've gone with these ones because I just love the amount of detail within them. And then there's actually just a bunch of different types of trees that we can actually place down here. So we've actually got a really good variety of trees that we can play with. So they're the main trees that we're going to be seeing around the map. But then you might have also noticed that I did place this incredibly big swampy marshland that I'm honestly probably going to expand. Not out this way, because this is where the city is going to be. If anything, it's going to decrease where the city starts to encroach on this area. But I think I'm probably going to expand it out this way. I think that'll be really fun to have like a big swampy area, particularly so close to the city. I think it's going to be definitely selling some New Orleans vibes, which we're going to be taking some ideas from a little later on down the track in this series. But for now, this is what the marshland looks like, and we're going to add to it as we go. And then, you know, just bits and pieces here and there. I've just made some of these mountains a little bit taller. I've added in some roads, which we'll talk about in a second. But this is the map. This is the bulk of it. And it's going to change, and we're going to do some things to it. We'll add some things. And then in terms of all the mods and graphic settings that I'm using, I'm going to make a separate video about that, which should be out later on in the week. So look forward to that if you're interested in sort of things that I'm using. But that's all the trees and the changes I've made. I've also done a couple of things around the city that I think is really important when creating or starting your first city within this game. And that is adding in some roads that are going to be of, I guess, of a more realistic way than, let's say if I was to, so originally there was a road that came out this way. Now, I felt like I needed to place in some extra roads because whatever town we end up building down here, wherever the downtown, wherever the city center is going to sit, that's going to be based around the roads that were first established out here. This highway was not the first thing built around here. If anything, this small road that stretches out this way, this dirt road that comes out here, they would have been the original roads. So that's where the city is going to take place. That's where it's going to first start off. And then they would have built this highway. So we've got these roads, and what I need to do first is I need to get rid of this train station because I actually don't want, I'm pressing, okay. Oh, okay, that's locked. So we don't need a big train station right now because we don't really have a big city at the moment. We've got nothing. So we don't really need a massive train station right there. And unfortunately, it looks like we're stuck with this little hole down here because I can't seem to, let's say, can't do any landscaping. Okay, that's fine. How about we use a road instead just to cover him up so that, there we go. So I think that's going to be my general road layout. It is going to form the basis of the center of the city. I think the center of the city is something like around here, which unfortunately I can't unlock these areas. I think I need to build a few things before I get there. Now, the next steps that I have to take are fairly important ones because I need to figure out the general idea of the grid. Now, I don't want to change the grid down the track. Cities don't all of a sudden decide to completely change their downtown layout. They have to work around it, which is what I have to do as well. So I don't want to be too rigid with my grid. I don't want to just drag out this like that. I don't want it just to follow this. I need it to do some sort of interesting things, but I don't want to plan out the entire city, particularly because I'm already starting to chew through a bit of cash and paying some taxes on these roads. So I'm probably going to switch to some of these dirt ones instead. That's a little bit better. There is a bit of a grid, of course. I do like a grid. Wouldn't be a city without it. But I also, just as a personal taste, I prefer having a grid that just changes ever so slightly in areas, then it just makes for a much more interesting looking city. And you can see it's going to change when we get out in other areas, but I do need to be a bit careful because I am starting to burn through a little bit of the cash. We should probably start getting in some residents so we can tax them and make a little bit of coin. Now I'm going to start with some commercial areas, and I'm going to put it naturally along this main road where we're going to get the most amount of traffic. And when it comes to zoning, I'm using a mod down here called Zoning Adjuster. Now, Zoning Adjuster means that if I click it, then I can right click on these roads and I won't have any building zoned on those roads. And this zoning adjuster is mostly for these residential. I don't want any houses growing on these roads here. I only want them growing on these ones. So just right clicking on them. I don't mind about those. Not on these ones. There we go. And I think this is going to make for a much more realistic looking city layout, particularly when it comes to the suburbs. There. Now, the great thing about this map is that Al has very kindly given us a little bit of power over here. In fact, he's given us a bunch of things. We've got some water supply, we've got some rubbish management, some sewage management, so it's very easy just to drag out a couple of power lines, which I'm using these utility poles. They are so great. I highly recommend them. So we've reached our first milestone, which is pretty exciting. We've unlocked a bunch of things that I'll start to explore, but we've also started to get a bit of a need for some offices and some industry, although in fact I can't even build any offices, not for 6,000. Okay, great, wonderful. That's quite a while away. But let's build some industry. We're not gonna do it around the city or the town. Let's put it out this way just for a little while. I don't plan on making this the industrial area, but I think until we start developing a little bit more of the outer skirts of the town, which will be a bit later on in the episode, let's just give them a little bit of industry out this way. Hopefully not polluting this water over here. I've been upgrading some roads from these dirt ones. I'm using these awesome streets that I've been using for ages, these suburban streets. I particularly like them because they've got no markings and there's no pedestrian crossings, which I think looks way better, a big improvement. So we've just hit our next milestone, which is Worthy Village. Fantastic. A couple things have been going on behind the scenes. I've added in some extra roads just to start expanding out, getting a bit of an idea where some farmland's going to sit. One thing that I can now do is purchase another bit of land. I'm going to take this one. And that's it. Great. Wonderful. Alright, next time I'm going to purchase this one because that's the next spot I would like to expand out into. It's a shame that this guy is just hidden in that corner. That's fine. One thing that I'm really hanging out for is landscaping because I really need to add some trees. That is one of the downfalls with removing all vanilla trees, is that this place just looks pretty bare bones. These guys don't have very much going on in terms of foliage, so it'd be good to finally place down some trees. I think we also, so that's a real milestone. 1,300, not too far away from that. That's okay. For the time being, I'm actually going to expand out a little bit of the houses into these sort of areas, which I would like to, for just a little while, you know, for the next few episodes at least. Be nice to have some farms, or at least some scattered houses that have slightly larger properties than the guys in the center of town. So these guys are going to be sitting on some blocks of land that are just a little bit larger. So that's what we're doing down here. Almost at our next milestone. There we go. Tiny town. Fantastic. Alright, this is going to mark a pretty big point within this town because I'm about to change a fair few things. Great to see that I can finally start using some terraforming and some parks. That's wonderful. Alright, so this is where we do need to start changing some things. So it's a while until I can actually start placing down some railroad tracks. Now that's a bit of a problem because a lot of towns are built around rail infrastructure, at least rail infrastructure already being a part of the town. At the moment, we have our rail line that's coming through here. We've also got one up here. and there is another one on the other side of the bay that I do want to connect up. So that one over here is a while away, and we're ages until we finally get out that way. But I do want to start at least putting in some infrastructure as if that was there, you know, at the same time as the town was established. And at the moment, we don't really have the room for it. So I need to start thinking about where that's going to go. Because I can't actually drag out any rail lines, I'm going to instead use, let's see, what can we use? I think I'll use the gravel path, just because that sort of looks, you know, it's got sort of rail vibes, I guess. And I can't get out this way. All right, fine. I'm actually going to raise it up. Just a smidge. So I think something like this would be kind of fun. We could even have some sort of port out this way when we get a little bit of industry, of course. But besides that, I think along the waterfront makes a bit of sense. We've got this little junction over here where we've got the rail going in that direction, and it also connects up to this line going out into the hills. But I think that makes the most amount of sense. And potentially when we do have that bridge, that train bridge, we'll connect it up like that. Maybe. But I think in a port out there would be quite nice. Now I've done a couple of, well, I've done a cheeky thing. I've got all the tiles. I've done that because I actually would like to, you know, potentially even the next episode, work out this way. And that's not going to happen if I have to wait for all the tiles to be unlocked. So that's just something that's not, we're not going to do that anymore. At least the tiles being unlocked. But that's fine, because I think it's going to be much better to be able to work out that way sooner than later, because that is also sort of the point of this series, is to extend out into those areas that you know, would actually start developing up when this town would be developing up as well. So I'm thinking we'll probably do some more zoning out here. So the next thing that I want to get to is, now that we have the districts and areas enabled, we've now unlocked that, I want to get to how these houses are starting to look, because there's some very random looking houses starting to spawn in our little town. In particular, these guys and these ones, these are like my two least favorite houses, and I want to do something about that. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use a mod called Building Themes mod. First of all, I need to create a district, and I'm going to split my town into two districts. We'll go this side of the main road, and then we'll do this side of the main road. So I'm going to go into my district here. I'm going to press themes, and I'm going to enable theme management for this district, and I'm going to actually add my own. So I'm going to call this one, I don't know, suburbs. Yeah, pretty creative. So I'm going to call it suburbs, and I'm going to go through and add in the houses that I do want to start spawning. Now the ones that I'm after houses that are 2 by, let's say 3. Let's start with 2 by 3. I'm going to skip past the college buildings, because I've got an idea of where I want them to spawn. But I do want to start adding in some houses like this would look good, this would look good, this would look good. And I'm just adding in the houses that I think fits within a general theme. Let's see, there's some shops that I really dislike. This one, don't want to see you. Oh, there's another one. No thank you. And no thank you. And good. Okay. I think that's alright for my shops. Let's get out of there and we'll watch the magic happen. I think this is looking a lot better. It's just forming into more realistic looking suburbs, but there is one thing that I do need to be careful of, is when you get buildings that spawn between, you know, this guy over here is taking a big block of land. You can actually just change it, encourage some people to spawn in other locations. Generally, they're doing a pretty good job at staying in line. There is a little bit of repetition, but I think as soon as buildings start to upgrade a little bit, then we should start to see a little bit of diversity. Yeah, this guy. So that's fine. But you can also encourage buildings to grow just by having a look at So if I find a building like this, and then I can start placing them, and then that way you should only really get the buildings that you want in those locations. But I think that's fine. Plus, once we start adding in some trees, I think it's going to start looking a little bit better. Yeah, that's starting to look a little bit better. We're gonna wait for the population to start increasing again because I have just kicked a lot of the residents out by demolishing their house. I'm not doing a very good job of being a mayor. So while they're starting to grow, I'm actually gonna start adding a little bit of parking lots to our commercial district. So I have downloaded some parking lots. These are awesome because they just add just a little bit of realism to these areas with some parking. So I'm actually going to go through and just kick those guys out. Apparently they all cheer for parking. That's fine by me. And here, I'm also looking at the types of buildings we've got, and I think I'm trying to make it so that the parking's all together and that we have them next to the buildings that I think would probably have parking lots right next to it. Yeah, that already looks tons better. I'm also realizing that without trees, everything just looks very bare and pretty barren. So I'm getting the itch to start adding in some trees just to make this place look much more realistic. Because at the moment it's looking a little bit desolate. So I think I'll do all that expanding in a time lapse because that way we can get a bit more work done, and then we'll jump back into a live play and have a look at how everything's starting to take shape. Alright, let's get into a short time lapse and we'll come back to the live play at the very end. I tell you what, if there was ever a dramatic before and after, this would be the dramatic before and after, because adding the trees just adds so much. Like, you know, when I finished building this area and, you know, jumping into what you're watching right now, me placing down the trees, I was thinking, alright, well, maybe I've made a bit of a mistake not using vanilla trees, or maybe I've made a bit of a mistake just doing this in general because it doesn't look that realistic, doesn't look that nice. But adding in some foliage just really changes everything. As you can see, we are just adding so much greenery, but also just a lot of realism, and also just hiding a bunch of stuff, like a bunch of the imperfections. So if you're wondering why I am using the vanilla tree remover, I'm doing that because I much prefer the trees on the Steam Workshop. They're just very detailed, very realistic, and just a much better variety of trees. So that's why I do that. It does mean they have to spend a little bit of extra time plopping down your own trees. You can also see that I've also placed down trees on the sides of the roads rather than using something like network skins or something. I actually prefer doing it this way because I like the random spacing of trees rather than having them always aligned. Well, I know you can like change some settings, you know, so that they're not perfectly aligned, but for me, I find this just a little bit more natural. It means that then you can, you know, make some segments just without trees completely, and then you can also change like the types of trees that you're placing down. I like to have that sort of control. I think it actually allows for much more flexibility when it comes to placing down trees. But as you can see, we're doing a bit of a mix. I'm doing some high detail trees in some areas, and then in a lot of other areas I'm using this tree by Padelmo. I've been using this one for ages. It's basically a tree set. It's about 5 different types of trees, and they're just really low poly, but still fairly detailed, and they actually fit in with the Grey Flame tree set. And that is something to consider when you are grabbing a bunch of trees from the Steam Workshop. For Oceania, my other series, I just grabbed any one that I like. But asset creators have their own style. Grey Flame has a style, Padelma has a style, Mr. Mason has a style. So you do have to kind of consider how are they going to look side by side. Do they conflict? Are they different scales? A lot of buildings will be quite different in styles, and you know, you always got to kind of consider that. For this series, I've paid real special attention to that and made sure that I've chosen the right assets that all sort of work together, and it's a nice starting point when you start a new series. Again, if you want to see the assets that I'm using, they're in the collections down below, and I'll be doing a tutorial and a bit of an overview of all that later on during the week. But so far what we've been up to in game is added in most of the trees within the main town, and I've also added in a couple of parklands. Very simple, very basic, but would it be so great that they stay in these areas, you know, like it'd be lovely to have a bit of continuity throughout the progress of the city and to see how, you know, how the parks stay the same and how some areas expand out. And, you know, I think it's gonna be really interesting to see if that parkland actually stays there, whether I change my mind and put it into a different area. But for the time being, we've got a park there. We'll have to add a whole bunch next episode because this one's really mostly about just establishing the foundations for the town. And now we're starting to work on this hillside over here, this, you know, bit of a farming district, but I sort of imagine that it's more hobby farms and more just larger blocks of land, people who just have much larger footprints for their houses. And eventually this might be an area that turns into big sprawling suburbs, or it might be an area that, you know, continues to have big blocks of land. You know, people might choose to subdivide, or they might choose to, you know, continue to live here and, you know, just have bigger houses. So we'll see what happens, you know. I'm totally open to suggestions from you guys. I'll be really interested to see what sort of feedback I get and what sort of places you guys are thinking of when I start expanding out. But I do like that area. I'm using some different resources just to change the color, just so it looks a little bit more like farmland, those hobby farms. We'll have some other farming areas, I think a little bit further out of the town, and they will be more for like big industrial, not industrial, but be more like commercial farming. Unfortunately, my forest brush tool stopped working, so I've just had to do copy and paste instead with these trees on the outer skirts. Not doing a huge amount of work out this way because I think we'll be out here in the next episode. And I'm also adding in some extra roads just to show where some of those main roads are going to go. That one's going to head out towards the other farming district. And this area over here, I think will probably work potentially in the next episode when we start expanding out some of the farming districts, get a bit more industry, because that's something we're definitely going to need further on down the track. So yeah, not doing a huge amount of detail over this farmland area, but it's good to sort of get an idea of where these roads are going to sit, where some of the farms are going to be, and then we can start expanding out with a bit more industry, because I think that's definitely something we're going to need. But yeah, short time lapse guys, we're going to jump back to a live play and talk about some of the things I've done and some of the things we're going to change in the next episode. Something I haven't mentioned at all in this episode, if you have a name for this place, please let me know, because I have no name for it. This whole region is Mile Bay, but this little town down here, no name. So let me know. We definitely need a name for it. I have to mention that in the next episode, much earlier on than where we are right now. But this is what it looks like at the moment. We've made a fair amount of progression. It's changed a lot. It's going to change a lot more. I'll talk about the sort of things I'm thinking about for the next episode, but this is how it's looking. And in terms of population, 1,800, not too shabby at all. We are creeping up to the next milestone, which we'll reach in the next episode. But everything seems to be just plodding along pretty well, making a little bit of money, just a little bit. And for the time being, I think it's like, I like that it's just a small little town with some like farmland around the outer skirts. In fact, let's change a little bit. I say farmland, but it actually is not farmland. Let's change the farming industry by clicking that, and I think if I start zoning out some industry in those areas, I think it should turn into, you know, let's just go, like, what happens if I start putting a little bit of industry out, you know, just little pockets of industry. Yeah. Okay, I think that's gonna work. Just a little bit of industry out here. I mean, we'll end up changing it, but I do like that there is some farming industry and the outer skirts. We are going to add much more substantial farming industry a little later on. I can actually start using that. So that might be something we do in the next episode. I've purposely not done a huge amount of detail out this way because this is where I want to expand out. And eventually, you know, this spot, I mean, we're going to do industry, like farming out this way, but I think when the city really starts becoming a bit more established, the farming is going to be mostly out this way. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be pretty fun doing it out there. So look, I mean, the city's doing pretty well. I say city, it's just a little town. It's barely a town. We don't really have any substantial downtown. It's probably more of a, like a highway pit stop. yeah, like there's nothing really that interesting about the place at the moment. I do like that we are starting to get some of these little more higher density buildings in. I've started making a couple of more, some of them historical so that they can actually stay there. And some places are starting to upgrade. Something else I need to work on is the industry on the outer skirts. It's not looking that nice at the moment. So I do want to work on that. I think it'd be better to do something a little bit more interesting, a bit more spread out. That'll be in the next episode. But I mean, that's kind of it. I mean, let me know if this was helpful at all. I've really enjoyed putting this together. Now that I'm building a city like this, a town like this, I'm really pumped to see how it changes and grows and all the things we're going to start implementing over the next few episodes. I think it's going to be really cool to start seeing that change. I think I'm also going to change a bit of the road layout too, but we'll talk about it in the next episode. But guys, that is it for this one. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If this is your first time watching the channel, then don't forget to subscribe if you want to follow along and see how this place progresses over time. I want to give a special shout out to some of the people supporting the channel via Patreon, making episodes like this happen on a regular basis. So thank you so much to these guys: Alec Williams, Holly Softy, Brandon Ash, Mike and McFarlane, Stephen Hayner, Bob Taktari, Robert Maynard, and Kira Floke. Big thanks to those guys who've been supporting the channel for huge amounts of time, so thank you guys so much. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next episode. Catch you later.